Where'd you start to learn some of this unconventional type of training?
They look at it and they're like, dude, what are you doing? The impact is faster, right? Something that's slower is going to be more muscular. Something that's faster is going to be more tendon-based.
Even though you're going through like an isolation movement, your whole body is still being utilized.
Is there an upper limit on anything?
For myself personally, it's like I want to figure out what the limit is if there's a limit.
You lower
Yes.
in that lunge for 3 to 5 minutes for one rep.
Yep, moving very, very slowly. I don't want to ask my athlete to do something that I haven't done myself. One day I did one move it was 25 sets of 100 reps for like 2,500 reps. The thing that I got out of that is I was like, okay, this is too much. I was like, bro, 3, 2, 1. Just because I got hurt in that movement, that doesn't mean that the movement's bad. It just means that my body wasn't prepared for that movement in that 1 second.
You guys didn't tell me that this guy's all jacked and everything over here.
Super jacked.
Fucking A, a little warning would have been nice.
Never
Sorry.
asked Morty about that.
Throwing around 315, like dropping it like almost on his neck and then pressing it back up.
Literally.
Yeah.
What's the most you ever done on that exercise?
315 is actually the most I've ever done. I tried 325 today. That didn't go up.
Yeah, I think it's because of the negative wavelengths that were being thrown your way from Josh Settlegate. He tends to be a hater.
I agree. I need to handle that guy.
Somebody needs to do something about him, but I know we can't figure it out. He's up earlier than us. He does more than us in a day, so we can't figure it out.
It's okay.
Where'd you start to learn some of this just unconventional type of training? We've been following along. We've been checking out your Instagram for a while now.
For sure. I mean, it's just been a progression. Like, obviously, when I first started training, I went into, the old T-Nation stuff, all that stuff where, I got a lot from you and other people as well. And it was just where I'm at now has basically like been a side effect of everything that I've gone through over the past 13 to 14 years. So in terms of like recent, I mean, I was at a training facility with a couple other different guys, and one of the guys that we had there had brought in some movements where we were doing impulse type stuff. So basically think about like a chain. It was around a pole, and we had athletes like impulsing against that as hard as they could for a couple different exercises. And we saw some really good results with that in terms of like their resiliency and how they were feeling. So then it just expanded from there, where the concept of taking force, accepting that force very quickly, doing that for high volumes, and then using that to prepare an athlete to be able to like go do whatever they want. So it's been a progression over the past 2 to 3 years for that. Yeah.
And you were kind of like, I wonder what would happen if I started to apply this to a hamstring or a hip or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because so the one that you saw me doing was the bench. So you can do bench, you can do squat pattern, right? But then we can also take that same concept and put it into individual joints. So let's say we do it for an elbow, a shoulder, a knee, a hip, like you said. Take that same concept and apply it into those specific tissues, and then just take it from there. And I personally work with a lot of baseball players. So like that's where a lot of the upper body stuff that I do came from. Is just a necessity for baseball players to be able to handle their arms better, because that's a huge issue there.
Probably pretty receptive to it too, right? Like, because in baseball, conventional lifting, I don't think was all that accepted for a long time, and maybe still isn't, but the way that you're training is slightly different, so maybe it is more acceptable.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a progression, right? There's still a lot of people in baseball that would look at that, or even if they're not in baseball, they look at it and they're like, dude, what are you doing? And what I think people sometimes don't understand is, like, I'm not going to start someone off with something extremely intense that they're not prepared for. Like, we always want to listen to what their body is saying, right? And progress them through that. But when you see it the first time, you don't really, that's not what it looks like, because I've been doing it for a while, so it's going to look a little bit more extreme, but that's not how I start someone out, right? But yeah, I mean, in baseball, it's starting to come around a little bit. People are definitely more open. It's just going to take a little bit more time to get that, I think. Yeah.
I wish we could pull some of your stuff up right now, because like if someone were to see some of the stuff you're doing, how would you suggest that they regress it? You know what I mean? Because like when I was doing it, I was like, wow, I really feel that in my tendon, my elbow, my shoulder. But I feel like maybe I have enough resilience where I was able to progress it quickly. But I feel like someone who hasn't done this before, if they just start throwing shit around, maybe they could tear something.
Yeah.
Maybe.
No, for sure. Like, so if you look at what's on there right now, literally what you could do is you could start with just the hyper arm that's hanging down there. Start with just that with no weight on it. And the speed at which you impulse into it, regress the speed to what your body feels like it's able to do. Because so when I'm working with a person, that's always what I'm going to start with, is how much does this person, how much does this individual understand how to listen to their own body? Like, literally asking them, when you feel pain or when you feel any type of sensation, what goes through your head, or how do you interpret that?
I'm imagining, just to interrupt for a second,
Yep.
that some people are going to intuitively move slow if they're injured anyway on some of these movements. Does that seem to be correct, or could they still like totally fuck themselves up?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, you get a whole spectrum, right? But if we can go through that conversation of, look, your body works in loops. And the reason that you feel pain, the reason that you feel sensation is your body has all these sensors taking in information, right? Taking position of your joint, how much inflammation there is, taking how fast you're moving, taking all this information. Feeds that up to your brain responds. That's what determines how your body shows up. So if there's tightness, there's a reason that it's showing up that way, right? So if they start to understand how to listen to their body and interpret what it's saying, then they can regulate how they're doing the exercises themselves.
In a sport like baseball, I think that people maybe, they might see what you're doing on Instagram. They might see some of these things that you're doing, and somebody might think of them as being dangerous. But for some reason, when we think about the sport, we don't think about the sport being, obviously there's dangers to sport, but we don't think about the sport itself being that dangerous. But every time someone throws a pitch and every time someone swings a bat, I mean, there's a lot of shit going on there. There's tons of force being produced. And you could say that what they're doing is probably producing way less force than anything that you're doing in the gym or anything that you're trying to mimic in the gym. So can you maybe explain some of that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And that's exactly what you said, is like when you're throwing a pitch, there's a very high level of stress that goes into that, right? But people don't think about that because it's created as a sport.
It's a game, yeah.
It's a game. But then you look at training, you get in the gym, and the environment itself is so regressed, it's almost like you feel more, right? If you're playing in front of 40,000 fans, you're not going to feel what your arm is doing necessarily. If you're in a gym, there's no one there, and you don't have any music, you're going to feel stuff a lot more. So you have to understand, like,
that's really interesting. The word
difference.
feel, because with like a pitch, you're right. I mean, of course you're gonna feel it, but it's gonna feel way different than doing something for a set of 10 or something like that.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. But so, like, if we can get that understanding of the athlete or of the coach or of the training, like whoever it is, right? How much force is actually going through your body, through your system in a baseball game or in a pitch? Then we look at what's actually happening in a training session. That can help them to start to understand, like, okay, this is actually regressed compared to what we do in a sport. And so with that, if it's regressed, the volume that we need to do here to prepare you for the sport needs to be higher. Because that's the way that I think about it is, like, I literally want, when someone goes and plays their sport, I actually want the sport to feel easier. Not just as something where they're like, oh yeah, it feels easier. But your physical body is actually like, oh, this is less intense than what I've done to prepare myself.
So that's why you mentioned, like, sometimes with some of these movements, you'll have an athlete do like 100 repetitions at once.
Yeah. Because it's like, I want the volume to be high enough that it prepares them for that. Because you're going to throw 100 pitches in a game, or 150 pitches a game, or 175 pitches, including all the warm-up and everything.
Damn.
And that's just in baseball, right? If you take football or you take any other sport as well, like, there's a lot of repetitions that go into it. And to actually make that feel easier, like, we want to do enough volume to actually prepare you for that.
Good.
I do want to say, like, if somebody does, like, start trying to do some of these, or you call it impulse, like these impulses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, you will feel that immediately in the tendon of the area that you're working. And it feels good. At least for me, it felt extremely good. I'm like, wow, like, if I can feel that there and I can just drive blood there, then I can strengthen that specific tendon in that area. It feels amazing. So it's something that can, obviously, with what you've done, you've progressed it to a pretty awesome level, but it's worth it for, I mean, I think jiu-jitsu athletes would get a lot from this. Pretty much all sport athletes would get a lot from this.
Yeah. Or even all sport athletes, also anyone that doesn't play sport, because we all have the same, we all have muscles, we all have tendons, we all have blood, we all have the same stuff that makes us up, right? And exactly like you said, I think about these as training more of that tendon end of things, that muscle tendon junction, because the impact is faster, right? Something that's slower is going to be more muscular, something that's faster is going to be more tendon based. So this is a good way to actually train the tendon end of those connections that we don't necessarily do as often.
When you have athletes do some of these exercises, are they able to kind of snap into them pretty quickly versus maybe somebody who's maybe not as athletic?
Yeah, I mean, and we were talking about this a little bit before, right? You'll definitely see there's an aspect of rhythm to them in and of itself, which I think is pretty cool because it can help the act.
Why'd you look at Nsima when you said that?
We were talking about it earlier.
Yeah, we were talking about it before the podcast.
Oh, you said rhythm. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, come on. Come on. But
I mean, I don't have any rhythm. We already know
We
that.
know that.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
choppy. There we go.
Exactly. But someone that has more rhythm to start will go into them easier. Someone that doesn't, you'll see them struggle with it at the start, but then they'll actually be able to get into it and actually improve their ability to be rhythmic with it. So that's kind of another cool aspect of what they're able to do as you start getting into them. Yeah.
I like some of the stuff that I've seen from you because even though you're going through like an isolation movement, because of the way that you're going through it, your whole body is still being utilized. And I think that's something that kind of gets lost sometimes. And I don't think that we need to throw out all isolation exercises, but you know, when a pitcher, you know, goes to somebody and they do these kind of rotator cuff exercises where they're maybe lying on a bench or they're really just singling out that arm, they're seated or what have you. It's like, well, we're not really getting into the hips at all. Like nothing else is firing. Again, I'm not saying that isolation is completely useless, but I think you're probably better off trying to get into the whole system. Is that some of what you're trying to do with some of the exercises?
Yeah, because, well, I guess to back up a little bit, I want to train the whole system. So if we're going to do an isolation exercise, like let's say we do a shoulder exercise, I also want to do elbow, I want to do wrist, I want to do fingers, I want to do spine, I want to do hips, knee, ankle, toes, fingers, right? So not just isolating, because that's also a big thing in rehab of isolating rehab, whether it's an elbow or a shoulder. If you have a surgery, you have a major injury, like they'll do shoulder rehab or they'll do elbow rehab. It's like, okay, great. What about the rest of it? Because what I see that happens a lot is you'll rehab one specific area, but then it's just going to move to whatever the next weakest area is. So we want to bring that all up at the same time. So I think there's different aspects of it where it can be beneficial to isolate areas, but then also we want to be able to train the whole system at the same time. So that's where like the bench that we did before, that would be more like a full systemic type thing. But we could also regress that to where we're doing something for the elbow specifically. And it's like, okay, that's a little bit more elbow. But like you said, you still have to dig in with your feet for the weight to not throw you back. Like, and the impulses specifically, right?
Your stomach and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Everything has to be engaged in that type of stuff. Yeah.
by the way, what is that piece that you're using on the bench right there? Because a lot of people work out at home. That's something that, you know, you could put in there. What is that?
Yeah, it's Hyperarm.
Hyperarm?
Yeah. We actually just started making it. It's manufactured out of Texas.
Okay.
Yeah. Probably in the last 6 to 8 months we started making it.
You have a website people can get this stuff out?
Yeah, it's in the link on my Instagram.
Okay.
Yep, it'll be in the link tree there.
Is there anything, because again, there's a lot of different stuff that you've done on your Instagram, but specifically with this stuff, has there anything that's happened to you that's been kind of like, oh shit, like you're like, oh fuck, like it's kind of sketch? Like, and
Yeah.
how have you worked through some of that?
Yeah, so there was, I think it was October or November on there, and I put up a post on it. But I actually didn't do it doing the impulse. I didn't do it doing the impulse stuff. I did it doing seated good mornings.
I remember, yeah.
Yep, where I was going into the seated good morning, felt something in my back kind of snap a little bit, and just had to drop the weight.
We should find that.
And it took, I don't have the how long it took me to get up,
Is it
but
that one? Far left, bottom?
Far left bottom. Yeah, right there. Yeah, so right there, the weight's got to come off. And I was in that position for a good 4 minutes, got up, and it took me another 6 or 7 minutes to get back over to my phone to turn the camera off. Like it was pretty rough. But then like 3 to 4 weeks after that, I think I have a video up on there, but I was back deadlifting like 405, which I think my best is like 515. And then a couple of weeks after that, I was back to, I did deficit deadlift with like 455 on 4-inch plates or something.
Damn.
But in the process of that was like for 2 or 3 days after, it was feeling pretty rough. Then it just kind of clicked for me. It was like going back to what I was talking about with understanding what the sensation in your body is giving you. I started to dig back into that and start to actively move it the way that I wanted to move it. And then from there, it just started to take off.
Yeah.
And as it relates to the impulses too, then I started doing, because I wasn't doing any, basically seated good morning impulses, where it's like I'm in that seated good morning position.
Drop.
And yeah, I'm dropping, I'm impulsing now in that position.
You started doing that after this?
After that, I hadn't done it before.
You
that.
crazy fuck.
Well, I started doing them when my back was feeling pretty good.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's not like 2 days after, I'm not like, I can't move, but here we go. It wasn't that, right? But I started doing those after because I was like, okay, obviously something needs to get stronger here. And so
Dude, I honestly, I love the way you look at that because a lot of people would be like, okay, well, that means the seated good morning is a dangerous movement to do, and this is probably something that people should avoid, etc. You more so were like, let's rehab this, and then let's fucking increase the speed of this so I can be more resilient in this position, and this is more unlikely to happen. Most people don't take that approach.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's where everything that I'm doing, and like I've said, some stuff on my Instagram might look like it's extreme, but that's just because I've been doing it for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I'm working with somebody, I want them to regress it. So if it's an impulse, they might go at 50% speed, right? To where their body feels like they can do. If it's a depth drop where they're dropping off a height, they might start at 6 inches, right? That's absolutely fine. That's what we should do based on how your body is speaking to you. But yeah, exactly to your point, just because I got hurt in that movement, that doesn't mean that the movement's bad. It just means that my body wasn't prepared for that movement in that 1 second, right?
Yeah.
And then something snapped.
What are some of your thoughts on range of motion in terms of something like a squat? I see you doing all kinds of different ranges of motion, but sometimes when I see you do like a weighted squat, it looks like you prefer maybe a partial range of motion.
Yeah, I like working both of them in because I think there's benefit to the partials where you can load it more, right? So you're able to load it more, but then there's also benefit to going full depth. So it's something where like I'll use both, and it's just there's not really a specific reason for me to keep either one of them out. Mm-hmm. Like even the way that I think about programming is like if I have all these different ways that I can stimulate a body, whether that's through moving slowly, moving fast, high impact, more muscular end of things where we're moving slowly, all these different ways where we can stimulate a system, I want to include all of those over the course of a 3 to 4 week period and cycle through those so they all support each other and they all get brought up at the same time versus trying to like think this is bad, this is good, don't do this, only do this. It's like keep it all in there and then just progress it over time.
Yeah, I have a similar viewpoint. I believe like why not take advantage of partial range of motion? Mm-hmm. For somebody, especially like a newer athlete, I think an athlete that's been lifting for a while, there's a lot of advantages too. But for a newer athlete who really hasn't developed a good strength base yet, if they can get themselves to handle 275 pounds on a partial range of motion deadlift, I think it's a huge win. And maybe they do a couple sets of 3 or something like that, as opposed to from the floor, they can barely handle 225 and their form is kind of shoddy and stuff like that. So I think there's just tremendous benefit to it. And then I also agree, why not also just take that same movement and why not do like a 4-inch deficit deadlift, but utilizing weights that are obviously a lot more manageable and maybe the goal is slightly different. Do you kind of view it that way when you're when you are trying to express more range of motion? Do you have a different goal overall?
Yeah, so I look at it as what's the priority in it and then what's like secondary priority. So if we're going for more range, the priority is going to be the range that you're able to display. Second priority is going to be like, okay, how much can you load it without losing the range, right? Conversely, if we're going through like a partial range, priority is going to be how much can you load it. Secondary priority is the range that you're going through. So that's the way that I think about that is like, with every exercise that I do, there's like one specific thing that we're trying to get out of that it does better than anything else. Like a barbell allows you to put load on better than anything else does. Impulse rope allows you to put in force into specific joints better than anything else does. That's the thing that we want to get out of it versus going for like trying to use a barbell for like range of motion or something. Mm-hmm. Just like use a tool for what it's designed to be used for.
You have like a main intent. And then you kind of build everything else around that.
Yep. And the stimulus for the thing that we're doing be great enough to cause some change or create some change.
Yeah, I can tell you're a good coach because right before the podcast, I asked you a question and you said, for what?
Yeah.
That's always a sign of a good coach because, what are we talking about? Like, what's the end result? What are you looking to do?
For sure. There's got to be that context.
Now, you mentioned the for what thing. I have a video, but I'll play it after. But I'm curious, are there any movements that you would say are bad movements, generally?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to walk like same leg, same arm, like if I'm walking my left leg forward with my left arm forward, I don't think that's a good movement. Just even in terms of like you're not doing cross crawl pattern, right? So there's, or if you're trying to walk and you're just like hinged over and people are like, what are you doing? So I think there are movements that aren't efficient, but it's, again, if we go back to that question, it's like, what is the goal?
What is it for?
What are we trying to do here?
Maybe if you're trying to build up your back, maybe you actually want to lean forward because you're carrying something in your hands for a weighted carry, for a Zercher walk or some shit like that.
Yeah.
Right.
And then if you're trying to walk 100 miles through a canyon, Like, what do you do? What are you doing? You know?
Yeah, not a great position to be in.
Right. So it depends. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I got this video because I saw it yesterday. And do you see any of functional pattern stuff at all?
I've seen a little bit, not a whole lot.
What are your thoughts on the ideology in general, or what they do?
Yeah. I think there's benefit in getting people to understand how their bodies are moving, getting them to flow, getting them to understand how to be rhythmic. Like, I think about that as one training stress that we can have.
Yeah.
So that could be a training stress that we could use, just like training heavy could be a training stress. Just like designing a game could be a training stress and having them play that game. Or a training stress could be like, hey, these are basic boundaries for you. You create your own game. So like, okay, get the athlete to think for themselves, especially for field sport athletes.
Yeah.
They've been told by coaches their whole life what to do. Put them in a scenario where they're asked to create. So I think all these different things, like the functional range patterns or whatever, that can be a type of training stimulus that we use. Not that it would be the whole program.
Power Project family, we talk about beef and meat all the time on the podcast. That's why we've partnered with Certified Piedmontese Beef. But did you know this? That 85% of all grass-fed, grass-finished beef in the United States is imported from other countries? 85%.
Damn.
But Certified Piedmontese is made in the U.S. of A.
America.
Fuck yeah. So go out and get some of the best tasting, some of the leanest, some of the best beef from Piedmontese. Andrew, how can they get it?
Absolutely. So you guys can head over to cpbeef.com and at checkout enter promo code POWER to save 25% off your entire order. And if your order is $150 or more, you get free 2-day shipping. Again, cpbeef.com. Links to them down in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
Fuck yeah.
So I was asking because I saw this video the other day, and I think we should just play it because it's interesting. I don't know if you play sound too.
Yeah.
So Jefferson's curls lead to let's start over. The idea is the problem with Jefferson curls. Leads to disc herniations. Muscles switch off during movement.
Research shows when you flex your spine fully, the erectors change their angle of pull and are unable to optimally offset spine shear load. This means more load on the passive tissues like your ligaments and discs.
All right, pause. That was Power Shrugged made an appearance. So I'm curious on your thoughts there, because it seems like with what you do, you apply a lot of things. But specifically on that, what do you think?
So I think we have the ability to flex our spine. And I actually don't look at force going into tissues as a bad thing. Like if one muscle turns off and force goes more into a different tissue, I don't think about that as a bad thing, because there's probably going to be some point in your life where your body's asked to absorb or take that force or take that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not thinking about that movement as being bad. I'm looking at that as actually allowing us to train when that happens, right? And we then take that and we layer on having the athlete or having the individual understand what your body means when it's talking to you. If your body's like, bro, this is too much weight, this is too much range, and it just wants to lock up, then stop, regress it.
Yeah.
Right? So as long as we keep that context in there and they know how to regulate, then I don't think that that's a bad movement. I think we actually want to do that movement.
Because also in sport, there are going to be times where you disinhibit certain areas and loosen up certain areas. In certain areas, you're turning on. So it's not that always everything is working together. Sometimes you need to be able to have an area that's loose so you can maybe put more force through it.
Yeah.
So that's why I find it odd when some people are saying these certain type of movements are just overall bad, and then these movements are functional. It's weird.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I get it. I get it if you're trying to. I get it if you are stating what your end goal is, like we talked about. If you're stating what your end goal is, there's stuff that's better and there's stuff that's not as good, for sure. But for your body to not be able to do a movement, like if your body can do the movement, I don't understand how that's a bad thing or how it could be injurious as long as you know how to regress it or how to progress in it intelligently.
Gotcha.
Yeah, something like a Jefferson curl. Kind of what comes to my mind is seeing Michael Phelps like on the blocks years ago when he was winning all those gold medals. He was like one of the only guys that was able to fold his body, his entire body, like in half before he would get out of the gate for all those gold medals that he won. But part of, I believe, some of his ability to express that, some of his ability to basically touch his shoulders to like his ankles when he would like reach downward, I think that helped him to be springy and be able to produce a lot of force coming out of the blocks and be able just to destroy people. So bending down, I mean, which is a Jefferson curl. So like when does like bending down towards the ground with your hands go from just bending down to turning into a Jefferson curl? Like what's the difference? Mm-hmm. Jefferson curl maybe is like weighted and maybe you're trying to go like lower than your hands going past your toes or something. I don't know. But like
some people would say don't even bend. You must hip hinge. You got to hip hinge to pick that shit up.
It becomes that when it's written in your training program. That's basically what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there probably is better ways to pick stuff up. But I mean, I guess I would say like, like, why can't you do that? You know, that would be the real issue is like, maybe we should build a better capacity so you can do that safely. Because why can so many other people do that movement? And then you're in a lot of pain doing it, or it's causing like a disc herniation.
Yeah. And I also think too, if you're having issues with a movement, it's very difficult to address that if you don't go into the movement itself. Because like this is the way that I think about injuries in rehab, right? When you have an injury, your body and your system is going to remember that injury. It's going to remember everything associated with that injury. The weight, the position that your body was in, the environment that you were in, anything that's associated with that, your body's going to remember that, right? And so in order to actually rehab that, to me, rehab's not a set of exercises. It's not a protocol. If you're actually rehabbed, that means that you don't have to have a consideration on the injury itself anymore, like once you're through the rehab. Mm-hmm. If you still have to think about the injury, you're not rehabbed, like by definition, right? So it's different because I think a lot of times in rehab, it's like we're trying to get this person back to 80%, get them through the protocol, get them through the timeline, and it's just like, okay, you went through our rehab protocol, you're done. But they never ask the person, do you actually feel like you're fully rehabbed and you can go better than when you first had the injury, right? And a lot of times that's no. And so to get back to the original point, like in order to get to that point, you have to re-enter it because otherwise they're going to have doubt because your body remembers that. And so you have to take your body through and show your brain that it can take the inhibitors off in that movement again by going through it. Of course, intelligently, like someone has a major surgery, we're not going to be going and doing that 2 days after, or it's going to be very regressed. But over the course of that time period, we want to get to that point.
Something I observed in just like watching other people and just being a weird person in general with this whole like movement stuff.
I agree.
I was observing somebody at a bar one time. There was a guy serving my wife and I, and there was an older guy there as well. And I was watching both of them work. And the younger guy, every time he went down to get a bottle of something, he would squat down. He would like open this refrigerator thing and he would squat down. The older gentleman would open the refrigerator and he would bend down. And so I think that people are in way more pain than they can even imagine. And the people that are untrained at the moment probably don't really realize these little corners that they're cutting. And over a period of time, stuff's going to start to wear away. You're going to start to get into pain. You're going to start to get into these compromised positions because you're no longer moving in these positions that are natural for you to get into. Not just when you're younger, they're natural for you to get into at any age, but you have to reinforce it over and over again.
Yeah.
So that person that is skipping out on squatting down and reaching for something properly, they're going to tweak their back and then they're going to go to somebody and somebody's going to work on them and they're going to try to work on the back and they're going to have a hard time trying to figure it out. But the whole reason why the person's back got compromised in the first place is because they're not squatting anymore. Mm-hmm. They're not going through these other movements. So it gets to be kind of complicated on what to fix, how to fix it, where to look exactly.
Yeah.
But we have to mainly try to figure out a way to keep these tissues healthy. And the way you're going to do it is to move. And you're going to have to move in a lot of diverse ways.
Mm-hmm.
Let me add. Oh, go ahead. I'll add to that real quick because what he mentioned brought up something super funny. For a while, I had something on like the right side of my back. But one thing I noticed is that whenever I would pick something up, I would always use my left arm. And this is because I was like, wait, how am I moving when I do things? So when I pick something up, I'd always pick up on this side. I'd move in a way where I'd always be bending on this side and picking up on this side, on my left side. So I was like, fuck, start using your right. Just make it a habit to bend and use your right side more. When I started doing that, I noticed that there was less inhibition on bending on the right side. There was less pain over time bending on the right side because I was telling myself to use that side more because I built a pattern to preserve that side of my back by not using it as much. And over time, that wasn't going to be good for me, right? So you need to pay attention to how you're moving because that could be one of the things. Like you leaned into the thing that happened with your back. You leaned to it and you told yourself, I'm going to make this more resilient so this doesn't happen again. Or so if it does happen again, the rehab's not going to be as bad, et cetera. So that's just, it's important. That mindset in terms of injury is super important.
Yeah, and it's cool because what you mentioned was you became aware of it, that you're going to your left side only, not going to your right side. And that's something that you mentioned as well, is like if people aren't training, they're not even aware of how much better they could feel. I've even noticed this with myself as I make different changes. You know, I might look back 2 years ago and I'm like, I didn't even know how bad I was feeling at that point or how much better I could feel, right? So it starts with that awareness. And the cool thing is, as people start to get into it and as people start to move, they start to grow that awareness, right? And so they're like, okay, what else is there? You know, like what else can I do? How much better can I feel? And that goes into everything, whether it's movement and training or how they're eating or how they're living or how they're communicating, the relationships that they have. Like all of that plays into it.
Good.
Do you, because like I see you're progressing so many different things in terms of your personal training. Is there an upper limit on anything? Are you just trying to look for the upper limit of progressions on what you're doing? You're just trying to find where, okay, this is probably too much. I'm gonna pause here. What are you looking for?
Yeah, so it's really for myself personally. It's like I want to figure out what the limit is if there's a limit. And what it's kind of transitioned into now is if I understand all the different stimuluses that I can use within my training, and I'm going to use them all, and not just try to only do one, I think that plateau is much higher. Because what I've found is like, if I only do one thing where, let's say all I were to do is the bias strength and I completely stop doing movement work, my body's going to fall apart. And I had that happen. Like the start of 2023, I did rebound rep bench, rebound rep squat every single day for 3 months straight. Like it's just every day, along with some other training. But so the numbers went up a ton during that time. But also by the end of it, like I had a shoulder thing that I had to stop, back off, and rehab, right? But that happened because I was only isolating one specific thing. So what that kind of helped clicked in my mind for me was, okay, if I don't just isolate one thing and I keep everything in here, what like heavy work, range work, the impulse work, all this different type of stuff that's going to hit different things, the plateau, I haven't really reached a plateau since that point. And so that's what I'm trying to do is like, how can I best put together everything that I know how to do, as well as bring in new things and keep progressing that over time? And just like, what is a human capable of doing? Like, that's the fun part for me.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What are some of like the maybe 5 or 6 main things that you are trying to progress?
So it would be ability to handle force quickly. So that would be like the depth drops, the rebound reps, the impulse stuff. It'd be the capacity that I have to continue going even through fatigue. So some of that would be the joint moves. I have a thing that I call joint moves, which is basically like you take fingers, wrist, elbow, shoulder, spine, hip, knee, ankle, toes. You move them through full range, every direction that they can move, and you do it for high capacity. So let's say it's a set of 100 reps where you go 100 reps straight and you don't stop. And your goal is to continue to pull through more and more range, or as much range as you can, right? So those would be something to build capacity within the joint. So like that's another thing that I'm trying to build. And that helps to support the impact work, right? And then also like ranges of motion, so getting into extreme ranges. That's another thing that I'm trying to improve, constantly improve. Then outside of that, it's my ability to fully be in what I'm doing. And this isn't necessarily specifically training related, but it also is for me because like the base reason that I train is for me to be able to be fully in what I'm doing so I can process whatever stimulus is in front of me as it presents. Whether it's a training stimulus in the sense of something that I'm doing in training, or it's a conversation that I'm having, or it's something that pops up with business where it's like there's a problem that needs to be handled. If I'm fully aware and present in what I'm doing, I'm able to handle that when it comes up. So it's like training is an avenue for me to practice that and to be able to get better at that.
Gotcha. Let me also ask you this, because we haven't pulled it up, but sometimes I'll see you do something and then just hop into a sprint. What's the intent? What are you doing there?
Like the drops into sprints or what Which one are you talking about?
Let's see if I can. I saw you like you like were doing a lift and then you just hopped into a sprint right afterwards. Unless I'm tripping on it. No?
How long ago was it?
Maybe it was a long time ago. But
I have done so one thing. This was maybe 5 or 6 months ago.
okay.
But so something that I was messing with was the concept of being able to recover as I work.
Okay.
So basically meaning, so another thing they'll do, I call them slow lowers. Original guy that came out with them was Jay Schroeder. He calls them ISO extremes. So basic concept is that you're able to recover as you work, and the display of you being able to recover as you work is being able to do something immediately after you work, as if you didn't just work. So let's say,
Okay.
so to make it simple, right? Let's say
Yeah.
you take a lunge. You start at the top of a lunge, you lower for 3 to 5 minutes into as deep of a lunge as you can.
You said 3 to 5 minutes?
3 to 5 minutes.
One lunge, one rep. You lower
Yes.
in that lunge for 3 to 5 minutes
Yes.
for one rep.
Yep. Moving very, very slowly.
Wow. Okay.
And then immediately after that, be able to take off into a sprint as if you didn't just do that. Or be able to drop off a box as if you didn't just do that.
Probably feels so stiff,
But
so
right?
what I've gotten best at in regards to this are deep push-ups. So like if I start at the top of a push-up and I'm going to lower for 3 to 5 minutes, I want to be able to press up out of that and my hands actually leave the ground or leave the box as if I didn't just do that. But what I'm like, that's a physical representation that I've learned how to recover as I work
okay.
because I'm able to do the movement even after that amount of work.
It's a little bit like Chris Henshaw, Aerobic Capacity on Instagram. Chris does it way differently than what you're describing, but he likes for people to increase their work in between their sets. So maybe, for example, you're in between squats and you're just walking. But
Sure.
over time, he wants you to, maybe you jog a little bit and then maybe you walk a little bit. And then maybe, in between your squats, you're not only jogging, but you're maybe like running like a 400 for time, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. And one of the maybe slightly different way that I think about it is like I want the work that's in between to be more towards the maximal end of things, which is why I do like the moving super slow, because that is going to be almost like the same thing as moving super fast, moving so slow, because like your body has to go back and forth in terms of how it's firing and whatnot to move that slow. So it's like I want the work to be maximal enough to create some adaptation from that. But yeah, it's being able to work maximally and recover as I work maximally.
It seems like some of the stuff you do in the gym also is kind of mimicking like sprinting in a way, so it's like let me figure out like a sprint for my shoulder, because a sprint can like blow someone apart, right? Like someone
Sure.
can easily get hurt just going out and
Talking about the Seedman, like
oh no, yeah, some of that kind of stuff, and even just like letting your arm,
Yeah.
it's like a sprint for your shoulder, I guess, in some way.
Yeah, being able to use that at full speed and at full capacity, because like we talked about earlier, using individual parts, right? Kind of the isolation, but then being able to then take it and put it together. So it'd be like sprint is your whole body's doing something that you can do just at your shoulder joint isolated would be some of the stuff that I'm showing here. Yeah.
one thing that's interesting is like, what's your athletic background? Because you are you're in extreme shape, you're extremely strong, but you're a coach. And the thing is it's not common that you see a coach that's able to do the things that he's showing his athletes to do. So why are you maintaining that? And what was your athletic background?
Yeah, so I played all different sports growing up. Anything from soccer to, we had a pond, so I played hockey, played basketball, played football, played baseball. Yeah, played a lot of different stuff. Started getting more into baseball when I got into high school, then played that through college, and that's really where my interest in training first took place. It was probably 8th or 9th grade for me, which would be 13 to 14 years ago at this point. And just started like digging into it because I personally wanted to take my career as far as I could. And then what that transitioned into is me then becoming a coach as my career ended. And now, like you said, being able to do what I want my athletes to do, it's because I don't want to ask my athlete to do something that I haven't done myself. So if we take the impulses, for example, the one day I did one move it was 25 sets of 100 reps for like 2,500 reps for one move on both sides.
You said 25 sets for 100 reps.
Or 100 reps for 100 sets for 25 reps.
Damn.
100 sets. Jesus
But
Christ.
what's funny is the thing that I got out of that is I was like, okay, this is too much. I was like, bro, there is no need to do this much, right? It was like 2.5 hours of one move, and I was like, this is just stupid, But
Good thing you had to do that to understand.
I had to do that. At least I felt like I had to do that. Some people might be like, bro, you didn't have to do that. But I was like, I did, because I want to figure out what that end limit is.
It's a good coach.
So that I know what I can put other people through, and also know what they're going to feel and what they're going to experience. Because like as coaches, or we've all been training for a while, you remember what it was like during your 4th year of training, your 5th year of training, like early on. So if you know kind of how the athlete is going to respond, then you can kind of progress where they're at in their training cycle, as well as like where you're at in your cycle. So all that just helps me to actually be a better coach and help other people, because I know where they're coming from.
Gotcha.
What are some things that you think maybe some people listening could implement fairly easy into their training? Some stuff that you're doing. Maybe they don't need to buy like a strap or buy anything in particular. What do you think something they can start to incorporate almost right away?
So the joint moves and the slow lowers, neither one of those require any equipment, and they're very, very. You're not going to get injured when you're doing those. It's like, think a joint move could be something like if you take a fingers, like you're just doing this, or an elbow, you're doing this, or a shoulder, like you're doing this, right? Very, very simple moves. And then the slow lowers is just like push up, like overhead press, lunge, hinge, very basic movements where you're moving very slow and you're not going to injure yourself.
With the hand opening, you're doing it as fast as you can?
So in the thing that I have for it, there's like 5 or 6 different ways you can do it. You can move it as fast as you can. You can move it like slowly. Let's say you take like 10 seconds. This might be more for your shoulder, but let's say you take like 10 to 30 seconds to move one direction, and you're very, very, very specifically like pulling yourself into the position. There's like 5 or 6 different ways that you can do each move within the joint moves, right? You can also do holds. But those, as well as the slow lowers, I think are very good for building a base level of capacity for the person, for the individual, for them to be able to start building that base where they can then build other things on top of it. But I'll also say, along with that, I don't think it's necessary for someone to start with that unless they're very, very regressed. I think those are something that is worked in with everything else that's in the program. Just the biggest thing is a person be able to understand how to listen to their body and listen to what their system is saying and know how to regress.
At this point, nasal breathing while you're asleep is no longer something that just us bros do, but people are realizing that it can make a big difference in your sleep quality, your recovery, and all aspects of sleep. That's why hostage tape is so important, because many people have their mouths drop open while they're asleep, they're snoring, and that really affects the quality of their sleep. And that's why many wake up groggy and not feeling extremely rested. Hostage tape will allow you to tape your mouth shut even if you have a beard. Us bearded folks can put the tape on and can be confident enough that when you wake up in the morning, the tape will still be on your mouth, which will help you breathe through your nose. And they also have nose strips if you're someone who struggles breathing through the nose. Those nose strips will help you open up your airway and breathe a little bit easier while you're asleep. How can they get their hands on some hostage tape?
Yeah, you guys can head over to hostagetape.com/powerproject, where you guys can receive mouth tape and nose strips for an entire year for less than $1 a night. Again, hostagetape.com/powerproject. Links down in the description, as well as the podcast show notes. I like the idea of a coach hearing the 25 by 100 and then creating that program and selling it online. The old 25 by 100. But on some of these videos, on some of these videos, and I guess it's kind of along the same lines of like doing, like messing around and finding out. When you land, again, it's kind of like a dumb question, but you are grimacing. And in my head, I'm like, if I do something that makes me land and kind of say ouch, I'm like kind of out. So like what are you experiencing, and what is it that you're able to feel some form of discomfort? I'm just going to say it that way, just based off of your reaction.
Yep.
You can clarify if that's not the right word. But what is it that's allowing you to do that and be like, I need to get better so that way that doesn't hurt as much? Because I just feel like you're kind of like landing on something, getting like bruised up a little bit, and then you're still impacting that same spot over and over. And like, so what's going on there?
Yeah. So like with the depth drops that you're playing right now specifically, also understand I've been doing those for like 2 to 3 years. And something that I did, this was probably like a year and a half ago, but there's 2 days, one day where I did like 667 of them. And then there's another, but it was off a lower height. It was off 3 feet. And then another day where I did 1,000 of them, like a little bit after that.
From what?
From 3 feet again.
Okay.
But so what I'm saying is like that height wasn't as high, so I was able to more feel things during that.
Of course.
And so that amount of reps, like, it gives you the ability to be better in touch with your body. So like, let's say I'm landing, like on those where I'm grimacing, right? if I land a little bit more on my heel and my foot isn't quite as flexed to protect when I land, I'm going to be able to feel that. And it might hurt and it might sting, but like 5 to 10 seconds later, I've just done enough of them to know, okay, this is going to go away. And this is information for me to use the next time that I go and land, right? So it definitely is for sure that not all of them feel great, but it's the level of volume allows a person to understand. Again, it goes back to listening to your body and knowing what your body is saying. That is the biggest thing for you, because that then allows you to progress on top of that and actually push limits. Because I was doing these for a while where like I wasn't actually really pushing the height, and I didn't really see that many gains in terms of my actual ability to output like athletically. It wasn't until I actually started to push the height that I really saw that. But it's almost like I had to build the capacity and build the awareness before that to get to the point where I could do that safely. I mean, again, I know that it doesn't look safe, but it feels safe for me because I've done a lot of reps for it.
Yeah, and there's probably no way to like quote program that, right? You have to just go by how you feel.
Well, so what I'll do is the descriptions when I'm personally programming for people, the descriptions that I write out are going to be very like in depth, where it's okay, let's say we have, I don't know, 4 sets of 25 today. It's going to be like, do it at a height that you feel good with, that your body's able to do. And let's say like the last 5 to 10, really try to push it. But it's like, don't go too far, don't go too little. So it's worked into the description to kind of give them specific intent for what they're trying to feel or get out of that.
Got it.
Yeah. And what is your, like, what do you feel after doing 667 or 1,000 reps? Like, what do you feel the next day? Have you just gotten to a point where your recovery is so good with this high volume, or is it like, a few days, I got it?
No. At that point, it definitely wasn't. Like,
Okay.
When I got done with the 667 and the 1,000, I guess, like I don't know if I should say this, but like my urine was brown, and it wasn't a good situation.
I wonder how many times you've just had rhabdo.
Oh my gosh. But like 3 to 4 or 5 days after, my body was feeling pretty good again. Like genuinely is feeling pretty good. But yeah, I mean, next day I felt wrecked. But and I don't want it to get taken the wrong way at all. I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, because it's a proper response to what I asked my body to do. It's information for me to have and to use.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, but now taking into context, if I'm working with somebody else, I'm not going to put them in that situation. That's me pushing it to figure out what I can do.
Yeah.
So then I can use it for other people.
I think there's so much we don't know about reps and sets and all this stuff, really. I think all we have is like the science that we've tested, and it seems like all we can come up with is like we do like bodybuilding testing, we do like powerlifting testing, strength training. We've come up with some decent hypertrophy like protocols and stuff. But it's just interesting because if I told someone to do 10,000 reps, they would think you're crazy.
Yeah.
But how many reps of neck work do you get when you go to do jujitsu? Like especially in a particular class or even in wrestling, you know, someone just keeps pulling on your neck. Even just thinking of dragging the sled, you know, if I said, hey, drag the sled backwards and do so for 30 minutes, it's like, how many reps did you get in? Probably a fuck ton, because, you know, if you're counting each leg as a rep, that would equate to being a lot of reps. And then what if you translate that into basketball, where somebody is backing somebody down in the paint, dribbling the ball? I mean, they're moving their legs and they're driving against an external resistance. And they're probably practicing that a lot for an hour and a half or 2 hours in a given day. And no one thinks that's crazy. But if we apply it to the gym, then all of a sudden it gets to be wild. I mean, how many times a basketball player jumping? How many times a volleyball player jumping? How many times a baseball player throwing? Like not only do they pitch the ball, but they field the ball and they throw the ball every time. But then they're also amongst the infield, they'll just chuck the ball around. You played baseball, they'll just chuck the ball around just because it's practice. So how many times are they flinging that ball around at high forces? And it's like we're not really writing the reps down for that. So I'd imagine it just, you know, playing a game of baseball or football or some of these sports, the repetitions are probably actually like, how many lunges do you do in a wrestling match? Probably a lot.
Right.
You know, I guess it depends on who you're going against and how difficult it is and so on. But
yeah,
probably a lot of movement going on that if we try to count it as reps, there'd be a ton of reps.
And to add on to that too, there's when you actually get in a season, there's all the other stress that adds onto the sport itself. So like if you're working with a minor league baseball player where they're getting every third night or every fourth night, they're on a bus for 12 hours. and then the food that they get is terrible. Like that is a stress to your body. It's not a training stress, but it's still a stress to your body. And stress entering your body kind of interprets it the same way. So when I think about preparation, like, okay, yes, we're preparing you for when you get on the field, but we also want to prepare you for when there's 3 days in a row where you get 4 hours of sleep, your girlfriend broke up with you, you're not happy, and it's colder than you're used to playing in outside.
And you're just running on hookers and cocaine.
Exactly, but exactly.
Do that in training too.
I haven't done that one.
Good.
But
Different stimulus.
yeah, but like preparing a person to be able to handle more of that, to where they're able to be the way that they want to be, even in scenarios that aren't perfect. Because like, yeah, we can put together a perfect training program, like optimal sets and reps. But what happens when you get out in actual life and you get into actual sport? It doesn't work out like that.
Is there anything you do in terms of your athletes' training to set them up to fail?
Yeah. So like we'll do set and rep schemes where it's like you do one set until you fail or until you can't keep. So like impulses are joint moves, very simple moves, right? Do one set as many as you can, and so basically you just determine when you fail.
Yeah.
Because the move itself isn't difficult enough for you to fail doing the move necessarily. Like there's no weight added. It's just you moving. But do as much as you can, and then when you can't or don't want to go anymore, then you're done. So then that starts to allow the athlete to ask themselves, like, how much do I actually want to do here? Or what level of intent can I put into this?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different, again, if we go back to those stimulus, it's like a different way to stimulate their system. Even if we think about being separate from whatever is happening physically, that's more of like a mental stimulus where it's like them starting to ask themselves, okay, what can I go into here for myself? Because all the coach said is like, hey, do one set until you can't anymore.
Yeah. So they get better at auto-regulating. But I'm curious about this too. How do you handle those things so that, like, I'm guessing you don't set them up to do something like that the day before a big practice or a big game or something. So do you set that up away from from sport so that they can recover? Or
Yeah. So at the start, for sure. And then from there, it just depends on how the athlete specifically responds to it.
True.
Because some will be like, okay, if you've never done joint moves, it's a little bit tough to understand the feel that you get from them. But if all you do is like, okay, you take your arm and you go up overhead and then you go back behind and you do that as many times as you can, your body actually feels really good when you're done. Yeah. So that is an instance where we can maximally stimulate them, but they actually feel better, right? Mm-hmm. So something like that would be, okay, we're going to do this the day before a game or the morning before a game to set your body up to feel really good.
Yeah.
So there's definitely an aspect of aligning the programming with what they have going on for their sport.
Do you gamify it a little bit and have the guys maybe compete against each other, things like that?
Yeah. So it's setting up a structure to do that. A lot of the guys that I train, everything that I do is online right now. So most of them don't necessarily have training partners, but we can still be like, okay, you're going to do, like if we take the drops there, ask yourself to move your body in a way that you never have. So it could be like you have a tennis ball, you're going behind your back, or you're like kicking your legs up in the air, or you're whatever. It's just like giving them a chance to explore what it is that they're doing through the movement and making that a game for them versus laying it out specifically like this is what you're doing all the time.
It's very
You'll try to get them wins and losses and stuff too, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like things that they can succeed at, and then also things where they don't. Because if everything is just a loss, they're going to lose the want to train. Or they're just like, bro, I want to fail for the past 5 days. Like, I want to stop.
I couldn't agree more. I think a lot of times people are like, you need to work on your weak points, But it's like, man, that's really disappointing. If I go in there and only work on my weak points, so let me work on my strengths a little bit too, so I can kind of balance out how I feel about myself. You know?
Yeah, if you're good at benching, let's go bench, bro.
That's right.
Yeah.
We had a jiu-jitsu coach on recently, Greg Souders, and what you're mentioning in terms of like just trying to do something in a pattern that you haven't done it before is kind of similar to some of what he does. He has his athletes do. Like he'll set up games and he'll have his athletes get out to a certain position, but they can figure out whatever way they want to get to the end position. They can do whatever they want. He doesn't give them like an example of this is what you have to do. It's just like figure out how to get to the end goal in a different way. And that's like why did you end up upon that idea?
I think the biggest reason is because a lot of athletes now were brought up in situations where it was very strict, where like they started playing whatever their sport was when they were like 7.
Yeah.
And it was travel ball and they're going all over the place. And it's just like this is how you do it. And so kids get to the point where I'm working with them where they're like college or pro And it's like they don't actually know how to create stuff on their own. Like they have no concept for what that means. They're like, oh, you're not going to tell me what to do? Like, what do I do? You know? So it's like, okay, the weakest point of this athlete isn't their ability to play their sport. It's the fact that they're in this like little box that they don't even know like how to think for themselves.
They're playing the sport like everybody else, are comparing themselves to other people and so on.
Yeah, like they can't create their own solutions that are different from other people, right? So giving them, that's really the reason that I started using that, is starting to understand the difference in like, they don't necessarily play as many different sports as what I did when I was growing up. Some do, but like, okay, we want to take that and we want to put it into the training itself. So that the training isn't just for their physical body, it's like also taking these other factors into account, like their ability to create.
Yeah, there's a book, I think it's called like The Art of Playing Tennis. And the guy basically just explains like the key to like hitting the ball is to not really try to hit the ball like a tennis player. Like just hit the damn ball, just relax and just hit, you know, the ball's going to bounce and you just hit it.
Yeah.
And you don't have to sit there. And if you're thinking about what I just, you know, someone described to you of this very particular way of hitting it, you're probably going to mess up.
Yeah.
And you need to just kind of relax and say, I'm just going to knock this ball over the net. And then it probably kind of magically does. And you're like, oh, I think I got it.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's technique to it, right? There's
Sure.
more to it than just that. But sometimes we need to get out of our own way and be more creative.
Yeah. And there's actually, I mean, a really good book on that is How We Learn How to Move, I think is the name of it. So it goes through, I think it might go a little bit too far on the ecological side where it's like everything is a game. I think there's benefit to both, like creating games, but then also having some structure where there is some given level of technique or whatever you want to call it that's beneficial, right? But then also this other game side is like, okay, this is how you set up games. Is even if you want specific outcomes, like you want a person to be able to, if they're playing football, you want them to be able to evade defenders better. Just like set up a situation where you have two people and they're trying to evade them. Like it's super simple and it's fun for them. But just understanding how to set up games, I think, is extremely beneficial.
And I guess the way we learn to move is by seeing other people move, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What kind of games do you set up? If that's the side of things that you work on.
Yeah. So if I have someone that's in person, I can do that more. Like I said, what I do is online, so it's a little bit tougher to do. But like when I did have people in person, it would be like, I mean, for baseball players, you just play med ball volleyball. Super simple one, right?
Med ball volleyball.
Yeah, you have a volleyball net. You're playing volleyball, but with the med ball. So it's like rotational. You're throwing it over the net. You're deking. Like you're doing all this different type of stuff.
Gotcha.
Right. So something like that.
That's Ian Danny talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Danny ball.
Yeah. So like stuff like that. Or doing like tennis ball chases with different athletes where like, let's say they both start in the ground, they're rolling, they start at the same time, they're both trying to go get the same tennis ball. I mean, it's
rolling towards the tennis ball?
Like roll on the ground.
Yeah.
Like let's say you start on your stomach, you roll to your stomach, get up and go.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like different stuff like that. Where it's just putting them in a position that they can create and explore a little bit.
Gotcha.
How about body work for yourself? Do you get anything like any body work done at all?
Do we want to go into this?
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, because
So,
in the gym, you
yeah.
were talking about how like you really haven't sustained any like major injuries with the exception of that back thing. So I'm like really curious, like,
Yeah.
how are you, maintaining this awesome body?
Yeah. Well, and that's why I said it, because it's very different. I don't do any. So I used to do a lot of foam rolling. I used to do a lot of stretching. I did used to do a lot of that. I haven't done any in the past like 3 to 4 years, and my body has felt better than ever. But I'll go through the actual reason, right? Okay, so if you take something, or this is my perspective. If I take something like foam rolling, if I have an area that's tight, let's say my shoulder is tight. When I put pressure on the area, it's going to change the feedback that my brain is getting because you're desensitizing those sensors by pressing on them, like putting physical pressure changes it, right? So when you're done with that, your body is going to feel better. It's going to feel loose. You're going to have more range because you've shut off or you've changed the feedback that your brain is getting. So the response from the brain is going to be different, where it allows more range. That's not necessarily something that's going to create any change. It's just a 20, 30-minute short-term type of thing. So from my perspective, if my shoulder is tight, I actually want to feel that. I don't think of that as a bad thing. I don't think as my body's breaking down. This is information that I'm getting. So what I want to be able to do is take and be able to actually fully use that area. Because a lot of times for me, when something is tight or when something isn't as accessible, it's because I can't actually fully contract and relax that area. It's just like chronically on and it feels tight. So I want to actually maximally use the tissue of that area versus trying to put pressure into it. because then what that's going to allow is it to fully relax as well when I'm not using it. So long story short, I don't do any body work. Yeah.
That's good.
That's
And
awesome.
that's the reason why.
Yeah. I
I
think
would say a lot of the things you're doing is probably addressing, like some of the stuff that we do is like myofascial release, but the activity that you're putting yourself through every day is probably addressing that anyway, so that you don't have maybe the pains or the tweaks maybe that some other people might get.
Yeah. And the way, one of the ways that I look at it is in terms of efficiency. Like if I'm going to be trained, I want that to actually create an effect versus it being a routine that I do that has to be repeated every day. Because I come from the world of baseball. And so in baseball, there's like arm care routines but it's the same thing that you're doing every single day. It's like, okay, after the first 2 or 3 days, your body is so used to that stimulus, it's not doing anything. Right. But then if you go and you like foam roll for 15 minutes before every training session, and it's the same thing, like what is that actually changing with your body? Right. It's not a new stimulus. It's not stimulating any change. So if I have 60 to 90 minutes to work on my body, or however you want to say it, I want that to be efficient and it actually be creating some change versus being something that I just have to repeat. The training session is the thing that I repeat. I want within the training session it to be stimulating some change.
And some of the athletes you work with, they probably still get some of that work done here and there just because they probably have access.
Yeah, they definitely will. There's different levels of, yeah.
So you're not so against it that you're
I'm not
telling those
against
guys
it.
not
Right,
to do it. Yeah.
right. I'm not going to tell them not to do it. I'll just explain basically what I went through. Like, hey, this is why that shows up, and this is how we can address it. And then usually at that point they're like, okay, that makes sense, and then we'll go into what we're going to go into. But yeah, even at some schools, like you have to go into the trainer and get some stuff done. It just depends.
Yeah, I think like we probably would agree with everything you just said. Even though we like to smash on our bodies and like kind of do some fascia release and stuff. For me, I know when I do that, I kind of do gain that range of motion to where I can move a lot better. So what's your take on that? Like kind of like freeing up and doing exactly what you said it would do, which is like kind of like killing those, I guess that sensation and tricking my body into thinking it feels better. But after I do it, I feel like I can move a lot more. Do you think that, if somebody were to do that, you'd be fine and say like, yeah, keep doing what feels right? Or would you recommend like, hey, maybe try doing the other one first, like do the movement first and then smash, or maybe, take that smashing out completely?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, like I would want to use the movement to create that feeling because I don't want the feeling of tightness to come back after I'm done with the training session. Because I think that's what happens a lot. If it's attacked through foam rolling or to attack through that type of thing, is a lot of times when you're done with the session, it's going to feel just as tight because your body cools down. It kind of like backs off and then it just returns to where it was before. So what I want to be able to create is in your resting position for you to feel good enough that you're not getting that feedback from your body, right? And that kind of goes into I guess a more global way that I look at training is if we go back to the recover or stimulating your body enough to recover as you work, I want to be stimulating myself at 100%, like almost as if I'm in a training session all the time. Like whether I'm in a training session or whether I'm having a conversation or I'm writing programming, like the level of intensity that it takes to be in a training session, I want to have that all the time. So that my body, because like the way that your body wires, like your body only has how you are right now in present time. So it's always going to be responding and building new loops based on how you are right now in present time. So if right now in present time, I'm 50% hearing this podcast and then my other 50% is thinking about like, okay, how does my knee feel or what's my flight going to be like on the way home or whatever. I'm training my body to not be fully in where I'm at, right? And so if I'm not using everything that I have, I don't necessitate the recovery of everything that I have, right? Because that's all that, what dictates recovery is what you use. So that the foam rolling thing and that goes into like I want to be fully invested all the time, and then that actually allows my body to recover and feel good. Because one of the things that I think about is like when I was 10 or 12 years old, I would go shopping. I didn't want to go shopping. My physical body is absolutely fine, but I just feel sore, like my knees hurt, my back hurts. Like I'm 10 years old, there's nothing wrong with me. But my body still feels like that because I don't want to be there. I'm not really invested in that. So I think that is underplayed in terms of its importance for how your body feels, is like how invested are you in what you're doing? And do you actually know what it takes to be fully invested in what you're doing? Like mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, like all of that. So it's kind of a fun rabbit hole that I've been going down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how have you kind of ventured through that have you ventured through that with athletes, or is that something that you've just been thinking about on your own?
No, with athletes as well. And maybe the best way that I found to describe it is, so if we take the slow lowers that I mentioned earlier, right? Just take the deep push-up. Start at the top, lower 3 to 5 minutes, be able to press up out of that. For me, when it clicked was like, if I take the state of being that I have to be in to be able to do that, to be able to actually physically do that, that is what it takes for me to recover as I work. Because that was like a physical representation of me recovering as I work. So I was like, okay, I want to be in the slow lower all the time. Because before I'd be like, I'm in the slow lower. When I'm done, I'd be like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I can rest, I can take a break. But where it clicked, I was like, no, this is actually what it takes for me to recover as I work. So I want to have this level of intensity all the time. It doesn't mean that I'm like physically stressing myself necessarily that much, but that state of being that I'm in, the level of tension and focus, everything that I have being directed into what I'm doing, I want to be like that all the time.
Okay.
Because that's when my body recovers.
Mm-hmm.
With so many different disciplines that you're after in the gym, I'm imagining that maybe like just pure old school weight training / strength training. I realize everything you're doing is strength training, but yeah, weight training is probably representing like not a huge percentage of your training. Do you think that a lot of athletes have their percentage wrong, or a lot of strength coaches have the percentage wrong? Because the NFL strength coach of today is still a guy that wears a polo that looks a little bit more jacked than most of the players, but he's also very stiff and doesn't look like he would be able to play. So what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't like speaking for other coaches because I know if someone's looking at my stuff and they don't actually know what it is, they're going to...
Very good point.
They might not know. So I don't like speaking for other coaches if I don't know what they're actually doing. But what I can say from my experience, right, is in high school or early on in college, that was very much the way that I trained, where it was like, okay, we have 3 to 4 weeks, we're doing the same thing, and we're just going to go from like a strength phase to a power phase, but we're going to be doing basically the same thing.
Like 98% weightlifting.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I was like, I personally was much more stiff, didn't move as well, body didn't feel good, like body hurt. So from that perspective, the reason that I'm doing what I am doing now is because I found that to be a better way. And my body actually feels better and performs better. So yes, for me, I'm going to tend to bias that more because it's worked.
You've been getting great sleep. You've been handling your nutrition. You've been working out in the gym. You may have been running and doing all the things that you believe are helping you get in better health, but you haven't gotten your blood work done. That's why we've partnered with Merrick Health, because you could be doing all these things, but underneath the hood, there might be some deficiency or something small that could be the thing that moves you in the right direction. And without understanding what that is and how to change it with your nutrition or your supplementation, then you might just be spinning your wheels. So get your blood work done with Merrick Health. Work with one of their patient care coordinators so that they can give you the ideas of what you may need to optimize in terms of your supplementation or your nutrition, or potentially hormone optimization. And they can help you move in the right direction by helping you from the inside out. Andrew, how can they do it?
Yes, you guys got to head over to merrickhealth.com/power project. That's MEREK health.com/power project. And at checkout, enter promo code power project to save 10% off the Power Project panel, the Power Project checkup panel, or any individual lab that you select on their entire website. Again, merrickhealth.com/power project. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
Have you ever seen the way Christian McCaffrey trains? Have you seen some of that stuff? Not like in depth, though. You've seen him hop around and
I've seen a little bit of stuff.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He's just like really explosive, and I find seeing some of that kind of training just inspiring. Pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot like what Ben the Bounce does.
Yeah,
they've actually communicated. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've heard of
Ben the Bounce. I think I've heard his name. I haven't really dug into much of his stuff though.
Yeah, he's a dope too.
Okay, cool.
I want to say it was J.J. Watt. He said on a podcast that he thinks he kind of lifted himself out of the NFL because he loved lifting so much.
Yeah.
He was doing like 700-pound squats and shit like that. I
feel like that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Like athletes will go initially into it for their sport because they love their sport, and then some dudes just like fall in love with the gym so much that becomes their sport, and then they don't really play that. They don't really play the sport anymore.
Yeah, this is Ben. I just love the stuff that he does because it just looks like he's floating.
He is, man. He's just like
look at that.
little bunny rabbit.
Yeah.
So conceptually, what do you think some athletes need to think about so that, because athletes do want to get big, strong, jacked for their sport, but you can definitely take that too far, and it can get rid of some of your athleticism. So what do athletes need to be thinking about when it comes to their training to be able to maintain their ability to move smoothly, have good rhythm, stay athletic for sport?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to if you consider the level of stimulus that you put into your body for strength, put that same level of stimulus into your body for rhythm or for movement.
Gotcha.
Like not putting one as more important than the other, unless there's areas that you need to bias. But even then, keep everything in at the same time. So like if it's a new athlete and they're really good at their sport, their strength is just terrible. Okay, let's bias that more. But don't stop playing your sport. Don't stop creating in your sport. Or for someone that's been playing for 15 years and they're very, very, very trained, right? There might be something completely different that we need to try with that person, right? So it's looking at what is the situation or scenario that they're in, keeping all of it in at some point to some level, and then biasing what we need to bias for them.
What's some of the stuff that you learned from, you were mentioning Jay Schroeder? I always found that training to be really interesting, and Marinovich and all those guys from back then.
Yeah. So Schroeder, the biggest thing was the concept of recover as you work. And so, like I said, he called them ISO extremes. I call them slow lowers. Similar. I'm not going to speak for Jay at all. Can't. But that's the way that I think about them. But what I really took from him and what I've understood now that I didn't before is he would be like, in his words, he'd be like, you have to do everything perfectly all the time in order to be able to like recover as you work. So it's like from how you get in your car to how you drive to how you bend down to pick something up to how you stand there when you're doing dishes,
How you breathe.
Like he's like, everything has to be perfect. I don't like to think about it like that. I like to think about it as more like fun and, hey, I want to do this. Like not like it has to be perfect, but it's a similar thing. So that's a big thing that I've taken from him is understanding, a human has much more capacity than we think we have, or than most humans think that they have. But what it takes to reach that level of capacity is work, engagement, and investment, not like having rest and everything be perfect. Like that was kind of the flip for me. More work can actually be better. If you're fatiguing from more work, it's because there's some level of you that like isn't balanced, I guess. Like let's say you go into a training session and you're just so used to running your training sessions off of anger all the time. Like that's just something that you go into all the time, right? If you're not able to tap into other things as well, that's going to burn you out. Like it just is at some point. So if you're not, like literally what burns you out is the thing that is in the way of you being able to continue to recover as you work. And so that was a cool concept that I took from him and have been able to run with, is like put a person, myself, other athletes in situations where they have the opportunity to go far enough to fail. The thing that causes them to fail is what we need to address the most. Like that is their weakest link. And then continuing to do that allows us to get better and better, not only in their sport and their training, but like in their life as well.
In baseball, the elbow is really vulnerable. You see a lot of even young kids. I've heard of teenagers having like Tommy John surgery and things like that. What are some ways that people can, I guess, help protect their elbow a little bit more in a sport like baseball? Yeah.
Man, there's so much that goes into it. But I think the biggest thing is probably starting to understand that your body, you're not glass. And that stress in your body, if you're doing it in an intelligent way, stress in your body is the way to prepare you for it, right? Because I think the reason that a lot of that happens in baseball, and just, I mean, me being in baseball and being in the rehab space a lot, anytime that someone gets an MRI where something is off, the only thing the doctor is going to recommend is surgery.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of the reason that we're seeing so many more surgeries is just because we're getting so much better at seeing the fact that something is torn there. Whereas like in the past, someone might be like, hey, my arm hurts. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. I'm going to train. I'm going to rehab this, and then I'm going to come back. That doesn't happen anymore, because if you're in a school or with a team and you can't play because you have injury or you have some type of pain, they basically have to send you to get an MRI, right?
That's just bad news in a lot of ways, because they're like, when you go to a doctor and you're in that position, they are looking for the symptoms that you're describing.
Yep.
So I would even say you could probably lie and say, yeah, it's this arm that hurts, and they could do the wrong arm, and they'd probably find just as much damage going on in that other arm because they're seeing what you're describing.
Yes.
You know, like you did mention that you're fucked up, and they're trying to help you.
Yeah, and that's the only lens that they have to look through. Well, again, I don't want to speak for all doctors at all, but for a lot of them, that's just with education. That's the only thing. They're very good at being a doctor. They're very good at being a surgeon, but they don't have like the other aspects that go into it. So just in terms of being able to prepare yourself, starting to understand that your body isn't glass and that training is actually a good thing for you, right? And if something hurts, understand that all that is it's feedback. It's not something that you need to freak out about. Obviously, if your bone's sticking out of your arm, like go get that shit checked out, right? But starting to understand that, and then that kind of allowing the person to be like, okay, what is there that I can do to kind of train and prepare? And that's where like the impulses, the slow lowers, the joint moves, that type of stuff comes in. I mean, the reason that I use that isn't just to use them. It's because that's what I found to work best. And if something else presents that works better, I'm going to go ahead and use that.
I know it's
good.
I know it's probably unlikely that one of your athletes would get injured in training, but if that has ever happened, how do you work that athlete through rehab and then attacking that same stimulus like you have? Because many athletes, if they injured something in training, there's a fear around doing that again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll give a real example where that did happen. Like I try to be as transparent as possible, like with everything that I'm doing. So I was doing he just got a screw put in his elbow and we were doing rehab. And we were doing a max ISO for his lower half, where it's basically like you're in a lunge position. At that point, I did max ISOs where it's like you squeeze as hard as you can. And I was like, keep your upper half relaxed. Like I put in the description, keep your upper half relaxed and just do your lower half.
Yeah.
But like through that, he contracted his upper half and like he felt a little bit of a twinge in his elbow. So like, okay, great. That doesn't mean that anything is off or wrong or whatever. We just need to regress what we're doing. And so that's what we did. It was like, regress it to like joint moves. We're not going to do any intense lower half stuff for a little while, and then we build back up. So it's the same way. The same way that I attack myself is the same way that I'm going to attack anybody else. Because really, all I'm doing, if an athlete has an injury or some type of pain or inhibition that they're telling me about, when I'm talking to them, all I'm trying to do is get the information that allows me to feel what they're feeling. Because I always know how I'm going to rehab myself. So if I want to know how to rehab them, I need to feel what they're feeling, and then I can give them what I would give myself based on where they're at. So it's the same process that I'm going to go through with anybody in terms of just give me the information, and then we can put together a plan and go.
Is there anything specific that you do to kind of prep your knees for, or are there things that you've done over the years, or is it simply just the regression and progression to get yourself to be able to jump down? And I guess I would even think ankle. I'm just thinking of like when people see the videos of him jumping down from stuff, they're like, oh my God, my knee. They're just automatically thinking about like their knee, maybe their back or their ankle. Was there a lot of work, a lot of progressions that led to a lot of that?
Yes. So I will say, like, don't go try to jump off a 5 foot and land on one leg, or 6 foot and land on one leg right away. Like, definitely don't do that, because there's a lot of work that went into that. Like, I've been doing this for 13 or 14 years now, pretty seriously. And if we think specifically about the depth drops, just to give you an example, like I want to say a year before that, I started doing, so exercise would be a single leg stand. You just stand on one leg, right? But then I started like loading it with a bar and then with weight on top of that. And so I would do a lot of those where like, okay, we're going 500 pounds for like 30, 60 seconds on each leg, but we're going empty barbell and you go 15 minutes straight. And like you don't put your other foot down the whole time. So it's just like a lot of stuff like that where the exercise itself is much, much simpler, but that is going to then prepare me to have the capacity to start taking on that load. So what I would tell people is, I mean, really just what I did is like everything that's in your training program or that you want to include in your training program, just start it at a level that you're good with. If you're afraid that your back is going to break, then don't go that high. Or if you're afraid that your knee is going to break, start with literally an inch and just drop off.
Your eyes and your body will kind of tell you. You'll look and you'll go, that's not for me.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Like your body kind of knows. It's like, it's not a good idea.
No, for sure. Like when I get up on a 5 or 6 foot, I'm like, I don't think that's good right now.
Yeah. And if it was 2 feet, you would have already jumped.
Yeah, exactly. So use that, because your body is a system of information for you. Yeah.
Well, it's nice to know that you look at a 5-foot drop and also have some reservations, because even just like a box in the gym, like I would have to totally regress that and probably regress that again just because of like my body and stuff, and I'm just not sure of it. This is kind of like a different, like off-topic question, but you're very well spoken and you might just have like a super high IQ, but how do you learn, like, period? Because you're bringing up a lot of references and you know your shit, and like it's really awesome to hear and learn from you, but I'm curious, like, how do you gain and retain information?
That's a really good question, and I don't know if I'm the best. I mean, I've always been pretty good in terms of taking in information and being able to, I don't know, understand what I'm taking in. What I have, I think, gotten a lot better at over the past couple of years is actually being able to communicate that. And I think what that comes through is just, for me, what has come through is like reps and practice. Because when I started training seriously in like 8th or 9th grade, I was also putting out, it was on an online form at that time, because that's what we had at that time. But I would like keep a training log and I would just write out everything that I was doing, and there's other people that I could communicate with on there. So I've been going through that for 13 and 14 years. And basically what happens is I ask myself every day, what is it that I actually want to say? Not what is it that I saw someone else say that I want to like try to take or use, but it's like, what do I actually want to say, right? And through that process of, you do that every single day. Some days, like I'll sit there for like 30 minutes. I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm just sitting there like, what do I actually want to say, right? But through that process, it's literally like a training rep where you learn how to communicate who you actually are, what you actually think, and what you actually want to do. But without those reps, like, you don't get that practice. I think that's a huge part.
It's really hard to figure out what you want to say when you're new.
Yes.
All you can really do is like regurgitate, kind of copy, emulate, which is a great place to start, actually. You know, you just want to give credit and say, you know, hey, I learned that here, or those kinds of things. But it is really tough. And then even as you mature and as you get more smarterist, as I would say, as you learn more, as you learn more, you go through growth spurts, and in those growth spurts, you're like, I don't feel that confident saying anything right now because I'm not even really sure about this. So let me do the work first, and then you do the work, and then you're excited about it, and then you can share it. It makes it easier. But
yeah,
so you get like stuck along the way a bunch of times. You're like, I'm going to kind of sound like an idiot if I present this, and it's you know, because there's like a honeymoon period with stuff, right? Like you try something new, it starts to work really good, but then maybe you do it for 3 weeks, and it turns out that you like totally hurt yourself doing it. So that wouldn't have been a good thing to share, you know?
Yeah, no, for sure. And also, like, I guess for me personally, I'm not necessarily worried about sharing something that at some point wouldn't work. I'd be like, hey, that didn't work. Because it's like real time, you know? It's like, hey, this is actually what I'm doing. And I'm just like when I hurt my back, I'm gonna be like, okay, yeah, I hurt my shit. Like, let's go through it, you know? And that's where I actually think there's a lot of bad things about social media, right? For sure. But I think if you use it well, there's a lot of good things that can come out of it. And I think if you're willing to actually be transparent with what you're doing, it makes it more real for people. To be like, okay, someone that looks like that are very high or extreme level, like there's still things that person does that they're like, oh, that was the stupidest thing I've ever done, right? And so it just makes it more real for people, and like encourages them to also do that themselves as well.
Do you train your neck or your traps, or are they just jacked?
I mean, once in a while, not really specifically.
It's so disappointing for people listening. They're like, fuck.
I was always told,
he's like hoping like, he does like 6 sets a week or something. He's got some protocol.
I was always told I had a bull neck, so I was like, I'll take it.
Fuck, there you go.
Yeah.
Sick. It's the same thing that happens with calves all the time. Someone's like, man, what'd you do for those calves? Like, nothing. Well, for me, I was 330 pounds.
Yeah.
So weigh 330 pounds for a while. That's your prescription for big calves.
I was born like this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always discouraging to people. Then you just jump off a cliff.
Yeah.
I know I'm coming back to this, but have you always been the type of person to kind of just like go through things? Because going back to your seated good morning thing and that idea, that's a lot of kind of what we do with things. Like if there's an injury that happens, we don't just totally avoid it. We try to figure out a way to build resilience with that area, whereas some people will just totally just avoid that. So have you always been that way with this, or was there someone who encouraged you, or was there something you were doing that like you realized that that's the way you want to be going about things?
I mean, I think to some degree I've always done that, and it's probably just because of my upbringing. Like, I grew up working on a farm.
Oh shit!
So it's like, okay,
the neck makes more sense.
Yeah,
Everything
like,
makes more sense.
I'm gonna go throw straw bales in 100-degree heat for 5 days straight for 12 hours a day. Like, yeah, everything's not gonna feel perfect. So I think it's a lot of it is where I came from. But then also I will say, I did get, when I started getting a little bit more educated, I would do things that weren't as beneficial. Where I was like, okay, it has to be more rest or avoid this position. It's almost like all information or all knowledge isn't necessarily best for your scenario. Like if you're getting knowledge or information that isn't correct, like then it's not good, right? So I think at some point there was a point in time where like I would rest more. I'd be afraid to go into more ranges of motion, but that just to me intuitively never really made sense.
Yeah.
So I always went back to like, okay, if this is actually going to get better, I'm going to have to use it. I'm going to have to train it. Because even if you think about like if we actually understand how adaptation happens and like stimulus adaptation happens during training, it just makes sense that when something doesn't feel good, we still need to use that same basic process of stimulus and adapt. It doesn't mean that stops. Your body still works the same way, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be like not training something when you have injury would be like, hey, you want to get better at your bench or your squat, like don't train it. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, what are we doing here? So it's just understanding that the actual basic processes that our body uses, I think is very beneficial to know and understand, because then that can, those principles can allow you to then build training on top of that, as well as build rehab on top of that. Understand that rehab and training are basically the same thing. It's just a progressed or regressed version of it. Mm.
It's some of the like farming chores that they kind of turn into like almost you viewing as training to some extent sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely like the straw. I don't know if you guys have ever done straw or hay in a mow. Yeah, man, that stuff was.
I've done it once.
You've done it once?
Yeah, things are really fucking heavy.
Yeah.
So what is it you're doing?
So basically, like you have a wagon, right? Or this is how I did it. We had a wagon, and then you have a elevator that takes the straw bales up into a barn, right? And so one or two people load the bales onto the elevator, and then the rest of the people are up in the barn. Okay. So you grab the bales off of it, and you're throwing them to people that can then stack them in the barn. Mm-hmm. So this is done in like July or August. And you're up top, and there's just like straw and shit like all over the place, and you're breathing that in, and it's like 100 degrees. And so, I mean, yeah, that was definitely like, okay, this is training me, I guess, you know? Yeah, that for sure. But then the rest of it, like I fed cows for a while, and I was just like, I literally run around for 7 or 8 hours because I was like, I want to go train. So like run from this to that, to that, to that, because I want to get out of here and go train.
Yeah, get it all over with.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Get it done. I'm not trying to work 9 hours instead of 8 hours for that extra hour of that $10 an hour or whatever I was making. Yeah.
That's cool though. I think everyone kind of wishes they had that background in some way, even though it's probably just fantasy and you wish you didn't have that background, because you're also maybe halfway stuck in it, right?
Yeah. I mean, but I am very happy for it, because like, I mean, with that comes, you learn how to work, like you learn how to do things that you don't necessarily want to do. Like getting up,
gotta do your chores first.
Yeah, right? Like getting up at 4:30 or 5 or whatever it is. You just, like I don't want to do that, but now I have the ability to do that. So I'm very happy for what it gave me, and then also like, okay, now I know what I don't want to do, which is fine. Like some people want to farm, that's great. I understand that that's not necessarily what I want to do. So it gave me a lot of benefit for sure. Yeah.
What did you learn through hanging? Because we were talking about like hanging, something that I've been just trying to microdose and implement and get better at. But you said like 2 years ago, you just hung by both arms for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
So why did you start that? What did it help with? And what should people think about if they want to implement some hanging into what they do?
So the reason that I started is it was something that I wanted to use in rehab, and that I just started hearing it was good for rehab for overhead athletes. So I was like, as usual, I'm going to test it on myself first.
Do you believe that's true?
Hanging? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's very similar along like the other lines of, okay, that is something that we can do, right? So it makes sense that we should do that, right? And it's like good range of motion. It's going to train your fingers, it's going to train your grip. Like it's a great exercise, right? So yeah, I started doing that. Probably got to like 3 to 4 minutes, and the reason that I wanted to go to 6 is because someone told me there's a rogue cliffhanger challenge, and they're like, "Hey, you should do that." So that's the reason that I ended up pushing it for like 3 or 4 weeks and got to 6 minutes.
Yeah.
But I still use that consistently now. A lot of like hanging, a lot of one arm hanging, and just being able to load those up. And like we were talking about a little bit before, like if you can start to load up one arm hangs, or even if you're, I think you said you're 250, like you're right, you're built really well. Even if you can do your just body weight with one arm, like your ability to connect that hand down all the way in through the scap, and your ability to control that, it's very beneficial for that, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
How important is the grip for baseball?
Yeah, I mean it's extremely important.
Even a lot of the guys have jacked forearms. You see them at bat, and you can see the muscles of the forearms.
Yeah.
Especially like McGuire back in the day and Bond.
That might have been a little roids too help stuff.
Yeah,
for sure.
Just a little bit,
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe they
a
were
lot.
rolling some pizza dough or something. Who knows?
Yeah,
It's
but
a
it's
lot of pizza.
it's definitely important for that. And even in terms of like throwers, being able to support your medial elbow, your pinky and your ring finger are going to be very important for that. So like some things that'll have people do if they're throwers is just like take fingers and do individual overcoming isos against a rope or against a squat rack or something to be able to help support that whole medial side, because that's where like if someone gets Tommy John, it's going to be on their medial elbow here. So being able to have that support all the way from the fingers up and all the way through is going to be very beneficial. It's just like your toes and your feet. Like you want to be able to connect your toes, your foot to your knee to your hip, be able to kind of connect all that together versus having a weak link there.
Mess around with the extensors and stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, I'll like all four positions: adduct, abduct, extend, and flex. Yeah.
So
Moving around a lot.
You mentioned the feet quite a bit. When did you start like thinking the feet were an important thing for athletes to work on? Is that something you've just known for a while?
I mean, I think I first started hearing about it when I was in when I was in high school. So this would have been probably 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. So I started messing around with barefoot stuff. I wasn't really doing any foot training at that point. It's more like I'm just going to go barefoot when I can. The foot specific stuff has probably started more in like the last 4 or 5 years, whereas the joint moves that I have for the feet, where it's okay, we're going to move your toes every direction that you can move them, flexion, extension, adduct, abduct, and then also like the single leg stands with the barbell that I talked about, as well as like the single leg depth drops. I mean, the foot is probably the biggest limiter for those. For most people, and even if you're feeling it in your knee, it might be because like your foot doesn't actually know how to contract and how to hit the ground and how to handle that force. Because if you really think about it, your foot is really the only thing that's in contact with the ground most of the time, right? Yeah. So like that thing has got to be strong and prepared and ready to go. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Got anything else over there, Andrew?
I'm all good over here.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I was just, I watch a lot of baseball stuff just because I just find the mechanics of the whole thing super interesting. Do you have some of the guys sometimes throw with the opposite arm? Do you have guys swing with the opposite way that they normally swing? Is there any reason or benefit of doing any of that, you think?
Yeah. So I personally don't do skill work anymore on the baseball side of things, but I used to do that, and we would do a lot of opposite side stuff. But I will say too, what I've noticed with the high rep stuff, if we go back into the training thing a little bit, like with my non-dominant arm, even if it's like left arm impulses or left arm joint moves, it's like you get to a point where it starts to feel like you can use that opposite side just as well as you can use your dominant side. So I think there's huge benefit for that in terms of making your dominant side feel easier, is like using that opposite side, whether it's you're doing it in skill work or you're doing something in training, doing something in the gym. Because something that I'm doing right now personally is on the depth drops for single leg, my left leg isn't as good as my right leg. I can stick probably like 6 feet off my right and like 61 inches off my left right now. So I've been doing like double or triple the amount of reps on my left as my right.
Try it with your right eye closed. Next time.
Drops on the left?
Yeah, you'll be shocked at what will happen.
Worse or better?
I don't know. I made that up.
I was like, you know something right now?
I'm like, all right, let's go.
I don't know. Left side controls right side or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
It'd probably bring a different stimulus in that.
Yeah.
Look at a different color or something.
Sure.
Just fucking close your eyes and try to imagine where the ground's going to be when you
Yeah. Hey, that's a really good one.
I might go a little lower for that. I'm going to regress it for myself.
Hey.
Smart.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys having me on.
Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later. Bye.
If you guys dug this episode with Brady, then check out this episode with Sean Baker, the godfather of the carnivore diet. If you're leaning towards a carnivore or meat-based diet, this episode will give you considerations and things that you need to think about. Do it because John Cena said so.